In 1967, the factory in New Haven went quiet. There was no fire, no federal raid, no scandal dominating newspapers across the country. The end came through paperwork, bankruptcy filings, creditor notices, liquidation proceedings. Machines that had once stamped steel components slowed, then stopped. Workers walked out carrying lunch pails and small personal belongings. The sign above the building still carried a name familiar to American households, but familiarity no longer paid suppliers. The A.C. Gilbert Company was insolvent. That is where the story ends. What makes the ending difficult to dismiss is everything that came before it. This was not a fragile company undone by its first downturn. It had survived moments that reshaped the entire American economy. It operated through World War I, when federal authorities reviewed which industries deserved materials and labor. It endured the Great Depression, when consumer spending collapsed and thousands of manufacturers disappeared. It adjusted again during World War II as national production priorities shifted toward military needs. War did not close the factory. Economic collapse did not close the factory. But in 1961, the man who built the company died. Within 6 years, the company itself followed. That contrast defines the tension. How does a business strong enough to withstand global catastrophe fail during a period of relative peace and expanding consumer markets? How does a company that endured depression and war collapse in the middle of post-war prosperity? The answer is not found in a single disastrous product or one reckless decision. It lies in structure, in how the company was built, in what it depended on, and how closely its strength was tied to the character of its founder. From the beginning, this was not a corporation shaped by distant investors and layered executives. It was driven by the discipline and philosophy of one individual, Alfred Carlton Gilbert. By the time of the bankruptcy, his name still appeared on product boxes and instruction manuals stored in warehouses. For decades, that name had been associated with a particular vision of childhood in America: steel beams, precision parts, mechanical understanding, construction instead of fantasy. But by 1967, the system that bore his name no longer had the person who enforced its standards. To understand why the factory closed, the timeline must move backward. The New Haven operation did not begin as a declining enterprise. It began during a period when the United States was accelerating into industrial modernity. Cities were growing upward in steel frameworks. Rail lines connected regions with unprecedented speed. Machinery was not distant or abstract. It shaped daily life. Technical knowledge carried prestige and opportunity. Gilbert emerged from that environment. He was not born into manufacturing wealth. He did not inherit a toy dynasty. He trained in medicine and earned a degree from Yale. In 1908, he won an Olympic gold medal in pole vault, a fact recorded in official Olympic archives. The sport required discipline, calculated risk, and mechanical understanding of motion and leverage. Those traits would later define how he approached manufacturing. When he entered business, he did not treat it casually. He focused on structure and presentation. He insisted on quality. He positioned his products around capability rather than novelty. The enterprise that would become A.C. Gilbert Company expanded under a philosophy that valued engineering integrity and constructive learning. That philosophy made the company resilient. It also made it dependent. When resilience is concentrated in one personality, succession becomes more than a management adjustment. It becomes a structural test. By the mid-20th century, the factory in New Haven stood as a symbol of mechanical education in American homes. It had survived war, economic collapse, and industrial reallocation. Survival became part of its identity. Continuity felt assumed. But survival under one leader does not guarantee stability without him. The year 1967 marked the formal end of independent operations. The forces that made that ending possible were set in motion decades earlier, in the way the comp, any was built, and in the intensity of the standards that shaped it. To see that clearly, the story has to return to a different setting entirely. not a bankruptcy court, not a shuttered factory floor. It begins in 1908 in a stadium far from New Haven, where a young physician cleared a bar set higher than anyone else that day. From that moment forward, discipline, not chance, would shape everything he built. In 1908, Alfred Carlton Gilbert stood in a London stadium and won an Olympic gold medal in pole vault. The record is preserved in official Olympic archives. What matters more than the medal itself is what the event required: precision, repetition, control over risk. The event rewarded technical understanding as much as physical strength. Every movement had to be calculated. Gilbert returned to the United States with that same mindset. He had trained at Yale as a physician. Medicine offered stability and professional prestige. It was a predictable path. He chose not to follow it fully. Instead, he turned toward invention and sales. The decision was not impulsive. It reflected a preference for building systems rather than maintaining them. In 1909, he co-founded Maisto Manufacturing Company in Westville, a neighborhood of New Haven, Connecticut. The early products were not steel construction kits. They were magic sets, small boxes filled with tricks, props, and instructional booklets designed to teach performance and showmanship. The magic kits were sold through mail order catalogs and advertisements. They required careful packaging and clear instruction. Gilbert focused on presentation. The products were marketed not as casual novelties, but as tools for self-improvement. The language emphasized discipline and skill. Even at this early stage, he framed entertainment as structured development. The business grew steadily. Orders increased beyond the immediate region. The small operation began to look less like a side venture and more like a serious manufacturing effort. Gilbert learned how to manage supply chains, packaging, distribution, and marketing. He did not treat the enterprise as temporary. He refined it. The turning point came a few years later. While traveling by train between New Haven and New York, Gilbert regularly passed construction sites where skeletal steel frameworks were rising into the skyline. New York was transforming into a vertical city. Steel beams intersected in rigid grids. Rivets locked structures into place. Entire buildings began as exposed lattices of metal before walls and glass enclosed them. The image stayed with him. In 1913, he introduced the Erector Set. The components were simple in concept but precise in execution. Perforated steel beams allowed for systematic assembly. Nuts and bolts fastened parts securely. Wheels and pulleys introduced motion. In some versions, small electric motors powered moving mechanisms. The sets could be assembled into bridges, cranes, towers, and working mechanical models. This was not framed as pure play. Instruction manuals resembled engineering guides. Diagrams showed structured builds rather than whimsical characters. The language emphasized mechanical understanding. Advertisements suggested that boys could learn how real structures were constructed. The set aligned directly with the industrial environment shaping the country. Gilbert did not invent imagination. He industrialized it. The Erector Set mirrored the architecture of modern America. It reduced large-scale engineering into manageable components that could be assembled on a tabletop. The child was not pretending to build. He was practicing the logic of construction. The timing was precise. The United States in the early 20th century was defined by expansion. Railroads, factories, and skyscrapers symbolized progress. Technical literacy carried increasing value. Parents who worked in industrial trades recognized the appeal of a product that taught mechanical reasoning. Demand rose quickly. Retailers expanded distribution. Production requirements increased. The small New Haven facility had to scale. Steel components required stamping, finishing, and quality control. Motors required reliable assembly. Packaging became more complex. Maisto Manufacturing began to transform into something larger. The company's growth was not chaotic. It followed the founder's discipline. Standards were maintained. The product identity remained consistent. It was educational, mechanical, constructive. Gilbert resisted diluting the concept into novelty gimmicks. He built a brand around precision. As orders increased, so did the need for space. The Westville facility expanded incrementally. Additional workers were hired, storage areas filled with organized steel parts sorted by size and function. The company began to resemble the industrial systems it celebrated. But as the factory grew, so did its dependency. The philosophy of team. The enterprise was inseparable from the founder. Product decisions flowed from his priorities. Marketing reflected his beliefs. Expansion followed his confidence. The discipline that made the company strong was centralized. That structure created resilience. It also embedded vulnerability. By 1913, the Erector Set had established a new category in the toy market. It was not competing on fantasy. It was competing on aspiration. The product aligned with the country's industrial trajectory and positioned the company at the intersection of education and manufacturing. Factory space continued expanding in New Haven. Demand showed no sign of immediate decline. The brand identity hardened around steel, structure, and discipline. The company was no longer a small magic kit operation. It had become a manufacturer tied to the vision of one man who believed mechanical understanding was character. And from that point forward, the success of the enterprise would reflect the strength of that belief. One day, it would also reflect its absence. In 1917, the United States entered World War I. The shift was immediate. Industrial output across the country was redirected toward military necessity. Steel, chemicals, machinery, and skilled labor were reassigned to serve the war effort. Civilian manufacturing was scrutinized. Federal oversight increased. Priorities changed quickly and decisively. For manufacturers whose products were considered non-essential, the future became uncertain. The federal government established the War Industries Board to coordinate industrial production and allocate materials. The board evaluated which industries were critical to national defense and which could be reduced or suspended. Toy manufacturing did not rank high on the initial list of priorities. For the growing enterprise in New Haven, this presented a serious threat. The A.C. Gilbert Company relied on steel components. The Erector Set was built from metal beams, nuts, bolts, and mechanical parts. Steel was now in high demand for ships, artillery, and military equipment. If steel allocations were restricted, production would slow or stop. Without production, the company's momentum would collapse. This was not a market downturn. It was federal intervention. Rather than wait for directives, Alfred Carlton Gilbert acted. Historical accounts and company biographies describe his decision to travel to Washington, D.C. to address the War Industries Board directly. He argued that toys like the Erector Set were not trivial diversions. They trained young minds in mechanical thinking. They cultivated familiarity with engineering principles. In his view, they prepared the next generation of technicians and builders who would support the nation's industrial strength. The argument was strategic. It framed the product not as entertainment, but as preparation. Gilbert presented his case personally. He did not delegate the responsibility. He did not rely solely on written appeals. He confronted federal authority in a moment when the government was empowered to reassign resources and shut down industries. The War Industries Board ultimately permitted continued toy production, though under the broader constraints of wartime material management. The decision preserved the company's operational continuity. This episode reveals something essential about the company's structure. Survival did not occur by accident. It did not result from passive exemption. It came from direct intervention by the founder. Gilbert positioned his product within the national interest and secured space for his factory inside a wartime economy. Many smaller manufacturers were not as fortunate. Material shortages, labor shifts, and regulatory pressures weakened or closed businesses across multiple sectors. The war reordered priorities, and not all companies adapted successfully. The New Haven factory remained active. Production continued, though under the pressures of a nation at war. Steel was rationed carefully. Labor dynamics shifted as men enlisted and industrial workforces adjusted. Yet the assembly lines did not stop. This was the first major structural test of the company. The Erector Set had been designed to reflect industrial America. Now it was being defended as a contributor to it. The philosophy that linked education to engineering proved more than marketing language. It became a strategic argument in a federal decision. By the time the war ended in 1918, the company was intact. The armistice brought a gradual return to civilian production priorities. Industrial materials flowed back into consumer markets. Demand patterns began to normalize. Companies that had struggled under wartime constraints attempted to rebuild. The A.C. Gilbert Company emerged from the conflict operational and positioned to expand. This was the first time the enterprise faced forces larger than market competition. It confronted federal authority, resource allocation, and national emergency. It survived because its founder inserted himself into the decision-making process and reshaped how the product was perceived. War did not close the factory. Instead, it reinforced the founder's central role. The pattern was established. When pressure intensified, survival depended on direct leadership intervention. The company's resilience reflected the presence of the man who built it. The war ended. The factory remained active. Many competitors were weakened or gone, and the belief that disciplined leadership could overcome structural threat grew stronger. It would not be the last time that belief was tested. By 1921, the enterprise that began as Misto Manufacturing was formally renamed the A.C. Gilbert Company. The change was more than cosmetic. The founder's name was now inseparable from the brand itself. What had started as a promising mechanical toy line was becoming a national manufacturer with expanding industrial capacity. The New Haven factory grew steadily throughout the early 1920s. Floor space increased. Equipment expanded. Production systems became more structured. The Erector Set remained the flagship product, but it no longer stood alone. Product diversification followed a clear pattern. The company introduced expanded erector lines with additional components and larger building possibilities. Chemistry sets entered the catalog, complete with laboratory-style glassware and instructional manuals that emphasized scientific experimentation. Microscopes and other scientific instruments were added. Educational kits broadened into multiple categories, each designed to reinforce mechanical and scientific literacy. The positioning remained consistent. These were not novelty toys, they were tools for structured learning. Catalogs and advertisements reinforced that message. The language stressed discipline, experimentation, and constructive skill. The company leaned into the industrial character of the nation. Parents were encouraged to see these products not as entertainment, but as preparation. The child who assembled steel beams or conducted a chemistry experiment was, in theory, rehearsing for the modern world. During the 1920s, the broader American economy expanded rapidly. Urban growth accelerated. Consumer spending increased. Department stores expanded distribution networks. The A.C. Gilbert Company benefited from this momentum. National distribution widened beyond regional markets. Retail partnerships strengthened. Orders grew more predictable. Workforce numb. Heirs in New Haven increased to support the expanding catalog. Assembly lines became more coordinated. Steel stamping operations required precision and consistency. Packaging departments handled growing volume. The company moved deeper into structured industrial production. Then, in October 1929, the stock market crashed. The Great Depression that followed reshaped nearly every consumer industry. Disposable income shrank dramatically. Luxury purchases declined. Manufacturers dependent on discretionary spending faced immediate contraction. Toys were not immune. Many companies that relied on novelty or purely decorative products struggled. Retail orders were reduced. Inventories accumulated. Smaller operations failed. The A.C. Gilbert Company faced the same environment, but its response reflected the founder's disciplined approach. Rather than abandon production or collapse under cost pressure, the company adjusted price tiers. Smaller sets were introduced alongside larger premium kits. educational positioning was maintained. The message shifted subtly toward value and durability. The Erector Set, with its steel components and long lifespan, could be framed as a lasting investment rather than a fleeting purchase. Chemistry sets and scientific kits retained their emphasis on learning and development. In a period when families were cautious about spending, durability and educational value became selling points. The New Haven factory did not shut down. Production slowed compared to peak years, but it did not stop. Workers remained employed. The company adapted without abandoning its identity. This was the second major survival milestone. The Great Depression did not end the company. Instead, it reshaped how it operated. Efficiency increased. Costs were monitored more closely. Product lines were refined to meet constrained budgets. The discipline that had characterized the founders' earlier decisions now manifested in operational restraint. In 1938, amid an economy still recovering, the company acquired the American Flyer train line. The acquisition is documented in corporate histories and industry records. It was not a defensive retreat. It was an expansion. Model trains had established their own market presence, and American Flyer was a recognized brand. Integrating it into the A.C. Gilbert Company strengthened the portfolio and reinforced the mechanical identity of the enterprise. Trains aligned naturally with the company's emphasis on engineering and structured play. The acquisition required capital and confidence at a time when many businesses were still cautious. It signaled that the company saw opportunity even in a constrained environment. Throughout the 1930s, the New Haven factory operated as a structured industrial site rather than a seasonal toy workshop. Workforce growth stabilized at sustainable levels. Distribution remained national. Catalog presence expanded. The educational message continued to anchor the brand. This period mirrored industrial expansion seen in other sectors during recovery years. It was not explosive growth, it was controlled growth. The factory became a stable employer in the region. Skilled workers handled metal fabrication, assembly, packaging, and quality control. Supply chains were maintained despite economic uncertainty. Retail partnerships endured. By the late 1930s, the A.C. Gilbert Company stood as one of the more established educational toy manufacturers in the United States. It had survived wartime resource scrutiny. It had survived economic collapse. It had expanded its product line without abandoning its core identity. The pattern was clear. When confronted with structural pressure, the company did not pivot into unrelated markets. It reinforced its philosophy and adjusted tactically. The factory in New Haven was operating at meaningful scale before the onset of World War II. Its systems were mature. Its distribution network was national. Its workforce was experienced. The company had passed two major tests of survival. War had not stopped it. Depression had not ended it. The belief that disciplined leadership and industrial alignment could outlast crisis seemed justified. Another global conflict was approaching, and once again, the factory would face a system larger than itself. When the United States entered World War II, civilian manufacturing shifted once again. Industrial capacity across the country was reorganized around military production. Steel, chemicals, machinery, and labor were directed toward national defense. Like many manufacturers, the A.C. Gilbert Company adjusted its operations to meet wartime conditions. Toy production was reduced. Materials were rationed. The New Haven factory contributed to wartime needs in accordance with federal priorities. The shift was not a collapse, but a reallocation. Civilian products became secondary to national demands. The systems built during earlier expansions allowed the company to adapt without shutting down entirely. When the war ended in 1945, the United States entered a different kind of transformation. Millions of servicemen returned home. Housing developments expanded rapidly. Suburban communities grew outside major cities. The birth rate increased sharply, initiating what would later be described as the baby boom. Household formation accelerated. Consumer demand followed. The economic environment of the late 1940s and 1950s was defined by growth. Rising incomes, expanding retail networks, and improved distribution systems reshaped domestic markets. Families invested in homes, appliances, and goods that reflected stability and aspiration. Educational toys fit naturally into that environment. Demand surged. The Erector Set regained full production scale. Larger sets returned to shelves alongside expanded mechanical systems. Chemistry sets became standard offerings in department stores and catalogs. Microscopes and scientific kits reinforced the brand's identity as an educational manufacturer. The acquisition of American flyer trains in 1938 now revealed its full strategic value. Model railroads became central fixtures in post-war households. American flyer trains competed nationally in a growing hobby market. The product aligned with mechanical realism and technical assembly, reinforcing the company's broader philosophy. By the early 1950s, distribution networks extended across the country. Major retailers carried the company's products during peak holiday seasons. National advertising campaigns highlighted structured learning and mechanical skill. The educational positioning remained intact even as consumer culture expanded. The New Haven factory operated at full capacity. Production lines ran consistently to meet seasonal and year-round demand. Steel components were stamped and sorted at scale. Packaging departments processed increasing order volumes. Skilled workers handled assembly, inspection, and distribution. Employment levels rose significantly compared to Depression-era numbers. At its peak, the company employed thousands of workers in and around the New Haven area. The facility became a major regional employer. The scale of operations reflected not a niche workshop, but a substantial industrial enterprise. This period marked the industrial high point of the company. The products were widely distributed. The brand was nationally recognized. The educational identity remained strong. The mechanical approach to childhood was visible in homes across suburban America. Erector sets and chemistry kits appeared in living rooms and basements where children assembled bridges, towers, and laboratory experiments. The company's identity remained centered on structure and discipline. Unlike some competitors who pivoted toward purely entertainment-driven novelty items, the A.C. Gilbert Company maintained its emphasis on construction and scientific learning. Catalog language continued to reference engineering and experimentation. The products reflected the founders' original philosophy. The growth of television advertising during the 1950s began reshaping consumer marketing, but the company's positioning remained grounded in its established brand identity. Its success did not rely on fantasy characters or cartoon licensing. It relied on mechanical aspiration. Throughout this period, the leadership remained founder-centered. Alfred Carlton Gilbert was still associated directly with the company. His name appeared on packaging. His reputation anchored the brand's credibility. Strategic decisions reflected his long-held priorities. Expansion did not dilute the core identity. The company had survived war. It had survived economic collapse. Now it was operating within a period of prosperity. This combination created an appearance of stability. By the late 1950s, the New Haven factory stood as a symbol of structured childhood learning in America. Mechanical toys occupied an established place in post-war households. The workforce was experienced. The distribution network was mature. The brand recognition was strong. The systems appeared durable. In 1961, Alfred Carlton Gilbert died. There was a dramatic industry panic. No immediate shutdown. The factory did not close that year. Production continued. Orders were fulfilled. The company still held inventory, contracts, and employees. But the central figure who had shaped its discipline and direction for more than 5 decades was gone. The industrial structure remained in place. The factory building stood. The workforce reported to assembly lines. The products still carried the founder's name. The philosophy that built the company, however, no longer had its architect. The company had reached its highest scale during the post-war years. It had benefited from demographic growth and consumer expansion. It had secured a place in American households, yet its internal identity remained closely tied to one individual. As the 1960s began, the surface indicators suggested strength. Sales channels remained active. Production continued at significant volume. The New Haven factory operated as it had during peak years, but beneath that continuity, a structural shift had occurred. The founder was no longer present to enforce standards, make strategic decisions, or intervene during pressure. The factory remained. The philosophy that built it did not. When Alfred Carlton Gilbert died in 1961, the transition inside the A.C. Gilbert Company was procedural on the surface. Production continued. The New Haven factory remained active. Orders were still processed. Retail relationships were intact, but leadership had shifted. For more than 5 decades, strategic direction had been centralized. Product philosophy, expansion decisions, pricing discipline, and marketing tone reflected one person's priorities. After 1961, those decisions moved into the hands of executives who inherited a mature industrial system, but not the authority that had shaped it. At the same time, the toy market was changing faster than at any previous point in the company's history. The early 1960s marked a decisive shift in manufacturing technology. Plastic injection molding became dominant across the industry. Plastic components could be produced at lower cost, in greater volume, and with faster turnaround times than steel parts that required stamping, finishing, and assembly. Production lines built around molded plastic operated with different economics than metal-based systems. Competitors adapted quickly. Companies such as Mattel embraced plastic as the core material for mass-market toys. Plastic allowed for brighter colors, lighter weight, and lower shipping costs. More importantly, it allowed manufacturers to reduce per-unit expense significantly. Lower-cost production translated into competitive retail pricing. The A.C. Gilbert Company remained heavily invested in metal systems. The Erector Set relied on perforated steel beams, bolts, and mechanical components. American flyer trains required detailed metal fabrication. Chemistry sets depended on glassware and durable materials. The company's infrastructure had been designed around precision metalwork and mechanical assembly. That strength now became a constraint. Steel was more expensive than plastic. Assembly was more labor-intensive. Shipping costs were higher due to weight. Reconfiguring the factory for large-scale plastic molding would have required significant capital investment and a departure from established identity. At the same time, marketing channels were transforming. Television advertising expanded rapidly during the 1960s. Saturday morning programming became a direct pathway to children. Toy companies that invested heavily in television commercials gained immediate visibility in households across the country. Marketing shifted from catalog-driven purchasing decisions to impulse-driven demand shaped by broadcast campaigns. Competitors aligned product design with television promotion. Character-driven toys, brightly colored plastic figures, and easily recognizable brands thrived in the new environment. Advertising budgets became strategic weapons. The A.C. Gilbert Company's brand identity had been built on educational positioning and structured catalog presentation. Its messaging emphasized engineering discipline and mechanical reasoning. That approach did not translate as effectively into the rapid visual format of television advertising. The market moved toward entertainment-driven appeal. The company remained anchored in engineering-first philosophy. This created a structural mismatch. The enterprise had been built around durability, mechanical realism, and instructional depth. The new consumer environment rewarded speed, color, and mass visibility. Plastic manufacturing and television promotion amplified each other. Metal systems and catalog messaging did not. As competitors lowered prices through plastic production, the cost structure in New Haven became increasingly difficult to sustain. Higher material expenses and labor-intensive assembly reduced flexibility. Retailers began favoring products with stronger television presence and lower wholesale costs. Sales pressure increased. Debt exposure grew as the company attempted to maintain scale in a shifting market. Inventory levels required financing. Seasonal sales fluctuations became more difficult to absorb. Margins tightened. Unlike earlier crises, there was no singular external event to confront, no federal board to persuade, no national emergency to reframe as patriotic necessity. The pressures of the 1960s were structural and incremental. They emerged from technology, marketing transformation, and consumer preference. In previous decades, survival had depended on direct intervention by the founder. In 1917, he traveled to Washington to defend production. During the Great Depression, he adjusted pricing and reinforced educational positioning. His presence centralized response. After 1961, that mechanism no longer existed. Management faced rising costs, intensifying competition, and changing consumer behavior without the authority or singular vision that had previously defined the company's strategy. Attempts to adapt occurred, but the scale of transformation required capital and speed that the organization struggled to generate. Financial strain became measurable. Credit lines tightened. Short-term borrowing increased to sustain operations during seasonal cycles. Profit margins narrowed. The W8 of maintaining a metal-based production system in a plastic-dominated industry grew heavier each year. The factory continued operating. Workers assembled steel beams and train components as they had for decades. The product identity remained consistent. The market around it did not. By the mid-1960s, the structural vulnerability became clear. The company's philosophy, once a source of resilience, now constrained adaptation. Engineering-first discipline met mass-market entertainment and cost efficiency. The balance favored the latter. Creditors began pressing more aggressively for repayment schedules. Liquidity tightened. Cash flow volatility increased. The capacity to invest in significant technological retooling diminished. The company had survived war and depression. Now it faced an environment that did not reward its strengths. And this time, there would be no personal intervention to reset the equation. By 1966, the warning signs were visible inside the financial statements. Inventory turnover slowed. Debt obligations expanded. Negotiations with lenders intensified. The factory still stood. The machines still operated. But the financial margin protecting them was shrinking. Creditors were pressing. Liquidity was narrowing. And the structure built around one man's discipline was approaching its final test. In 1967, the end came through a court filing. The A.C. Gilbert Company declared bankruptcy. There was no dramatic collapse on a single afternoon, no sudden factory fire, no criminal scandal. The shutdown unfolded through legal procedure. Creditors were notified. Assets were assessed. Operations slowed in stages before stopping entirely. In New Haven, the factory that had once stamped steel beams for generations of children prepared to close its doors. Production ceased in its original form. Machinery was liquidated or sold. Inventory was dispersed. The brand name would eventually survive in other hands, but the industrial operation that had defined it for nearly 6 decades did not. The closure was quiet, and that quiet is what makes it significant. This was a company that had endured the industrial uncertainty of World War I. It had survived the Great Depression when entire sectors of American manufacturing disappeared. It had operated through World War II, adjusting to wartime production demands and emerging intact into post-war prosperity. War did not end it. Depression did not end it, but economic expansion did. The 1960s were not a period of national collapse. They were years of rising consumer markets, expanding media influence, and accelerating production technologies. In that environment, the company's structural weaknesses became visible. The fall was not caused by a loss of imagination. Children did not suddenly stop building. Interest in mechanical curiosity did not vanish overnight. The causes were more structural. Leadership dependency had shaped the enterprise from its founding. For decades, strategic direction flowed from one individual. When Alfred Carlton Gilbert died in 1961, the authority that unified philosophy and execution disappeared. The industrial system remained, but the centralized discipline did not. Failure to pivot quickly toward plastic, manufacturing amplified cost disadvantages. While competitors invested heavily in injection molding and lower-cost materials, the New Haven factory remained anchored to metal systems that required higher labor and material expense. Marketing transformation further widened the gap. The rise of television advertising shifted consumer demand toward brightly branded, heavily promoted products. Catalog-driven educational positioning struggled to compete with mass broadcast campaigns aimed directly at children. The cost structure imbalance deepened financial strain. Steel components, labor-intensive assembly, and heavier shipping requirements placed pressure on margins. As debt obligations grew and revenue growth slowed, liquidity narrowed. None of these forces alone would have guaranteed collapse. Together, they created cumulative pressure. By 1967, the balance could no longer be maintained. The factory closed. The beams did not disappear from history. Erector sets remained in attics and basements across the country. Chemistry kits and American flyer trains continued to circulate in secondary markets. The products left a cultural imprint. What disappeared was the industrial operation that produced them at scale. The broader shift was already underway. Steel construction sets gave way to molded plastic entertainment. Factory-era childhood, grounded in mechanical realism, gradually yielded to television-era branding and character-driven marketing. The physical weight of metal components was replaced by the lighter economics of injection-molded parts. The New Haven factory had embodied a particular vision of American manufacturing. It aligned childhood learning with industrial discipline. It assumed that mechanical understanding was preparation for adulthood. For decades, that assumption held. Then the market changed. The company's story is not simply about decline, it is about structural transition. It illustrates how resilience under one set of economic conditions does not guarantee adaptability under another. The factory survived wars and depression. It did not survive transformation. If this story makes you reconsider how industries rise and fall, there is more to examine. Many companies that shaped modern life followed similar arcs, expanding under one economic logic and contracting under another. Which industrial story should be explored next? Share your thoughts below. Your suggestions shape the direction of future investigations. And if you value documented, structured examinations of the systems behind familiar brands, consider subscribing. These histories are not about nostalgia. They are about understanding how economic forces, leadership decisions, and technological shifts reshape entire industries. The beams still exist in collections and memories. The factory that stamped them does not. History does not vanish. It changes form. And sometimes the quietest closures reveal the loudest lessons.